The security guards flanked her like wolves circling prey, their radios crackling with threats to remove the trespasser. What they didn't know was that Dr. Amara Washington wasn't just any resident. She was an FBI profiler who had been tracking their boss for months. And today, she was about to discover that her quiet suburban neighborhood was the epicenter of something far more sinister than petty racism. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estates as Dr. Amara Washington stepped out of her silver BMW, her FBI credentials tucked safely in her purse beside her service weapon. She had moved to this exclusive gated community 3 months ago, seeking the kind of peace that only suburban silence could provide after 15 years of hunting down the worst humanity had to offer. What she found instead was Margaret Kellerman. "Excuse me." The shrill voice cut through the morning air like nails on glass. "Excuse me?" Amara turned, already recognizing the voice that had plagued her since day one. Margaret Kellerman, HOA, president and self-appointed guardian of Willowbrook's standards, strode across the manicured lawn with the purposeful gait of someone who had never been told no. At 62, Margaret carried herself with the imperious bearing of old money, though Amara's investigative instincts told her the woman's designer clothes were knockoffs and her jewelry slightly too flashy to be authentic. "Everything about," Margaret screamed, desperation masquerading as authority. "Ms. Washington." Margaret's voice dripped with false politeness. "We need to discuss your landscaping choices." Amara glanced at her front yard, where she'd planted native wildflowers and installed a small rain garden, both environmentally responsible and beautiful. "What about them?" "They're not in compliance with our community standards." Margaret produced a thick folder from her oversized purse. Article 15, Section 3, clearly states that all landscaping must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee, which I did. Amara's voice remained level, professional. "I submitted my plans 2 months ago and received written approval." Margaret's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The committee has reconsidered." Behind Margaret, Amara noticed 2 men emerging from a black SUV parked at the community's entrance. They wore matching polo shirts with Blackwater Private Security embroidered on the chest, the same company Margaret had somehow convinced the HOA board to hire for enhanced community protection. The irony wasn't lost on Amara that Margaret had chosen a security company whose name was synonymous with controversy and excess force. "Mrs. Kellerman," Amara said carefully, "is there something else going on here?" Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "People like you need to understand that just because you can afford to live here doesn't mean you belong here." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Amara felt the familiar surge of anger she'd learned to control during countless interrogations of suspects who thought her badge was somehow less valid because of her skin color. "People like me," Amara repeated softly. "You mean homeowners who pay their dues and follow the rules?" "I mean people who don't understand our community values." Margaret's voice grew louder, more confident now that her security detail was approaching. "People who think they can just move in and change everything to suit their preferences." The 2 security guards flanked Margaret now, and Amara sized them up with the practiced eye of someone trained in threat assessment. The first was tall and lean, with the kind of military bearing that suggested Special Forces background. His name tag read Harrison. The second was broader, with arms that strained against his polo shirt and eyes that held the flat emptiness of someone who enjoyed inflicting pain. His tag said Rodriguez. "Ma'am," Harrison said, addressing Margaret while keeping his eyes on Amara, "is there a problem here? This resident is refusing to comply with community standards." Margaret replied, "I believe she may need to be escorted off the premises while we sort this out." Amara felt ice water in her veins. She'd seen this play before, in a dozen different forms. The escalation was textbook to create a pretext, bring in backup, then claim the victim was threatening or not compliant. "I live here," Amara said evenly, "and I'm not going anywhere." Rodriguez stepped forward, his hand moving to the radio clipped to his belt. "Ma'am, you need to cooperate with the Homeowners Association representative." "I am cooperating. I'm standing on my own property, having a conversation." "You're creating a disturbance," Margaret interjected. "These gentlemen are authorized to maintain peace and order in our community." Harrison's hand drifted toward his waistband, where Amara caught the outline of a concealed weapon. Her own training kicked in de-escalate. "Prepare for multiple contingencies, Mrs. Kellerman," Amara said, pulling out her phone. "I'm going to call the police to clarify the situation." "That won't be necessary," Rodriguez said, moving to block her path to her front door. "Our company has jurisdiction here." "Jurisdiction?" Amara's eyebrows rose. "You're private security. You have no jurisdiction beyond what any citizen has." Margaret's smile turned predatory. "Actually, under the terms of our enhanced security contract, Blackwater Private Security has been granted special authority to detain individuals who pose a threat to community safety." The pieces clicked into place in Amara's mind with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about racism or power-hungry HOA politics. This was something far more systematic, more dangerous. "Show me that contract," Amara demanded. "That's confidential," Margaret snapped. Harrison keyed his radio. Base. This is Harrison. We have a code yellow at 1247 Maple Grove, requesting backup for a potential code red situation. The radio crackled back immediately. Copy that. Harrison, Unit 3 and Unit 7 are en route. ETA 3 minutes. Amara's blood ran cold. Code yellow, code red. These weren't standard security terms. They were military designations. And backup. Units responding in 3 minutes meant this operation was far more sophisticated than a simple HOA dispute. Margaret, Amara said, using the woman's first name deliberately, you're in over your head here. Whatever you think you're accomplishing. I'm protecting our community from undesirable elements, Margaret interrupted. From people who don't share our values, who want to impose their agenda on decent, law-abiding families. Rodriguez stepped closer, near enough that Amara could smell his cologne and see the scar running along his jawline. Ma'am, you need to come with us while this situation gets resolved. I'm not going anywhere with you. That wasn't a request, Harrison said, his hand now openly resting on his concealed weapon. Amara's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and felt her heart skip. The caller ID read Zach Morrison, her special agent in charge. This wasn't a coincidence. I need to take this call, she said. Negative, Rodriguez replied. Hands where we can see them. 2 more black SUVs rounded the corner at the far end of the street, moving fast. Margaret's smile widened as if she'd just won the lottery. You should have just complied with the landscaping requirements, Margaret said. Now look what you've brought on yourself. But Amara was looking beyond Margaret, beyond the approaching vehicles, to something that made her blood freeze in her veins. In the window of the house directly across the street, the house that had been empty since she moved in, she caught a glimpse of surveillance equipment, professional grade, the kind used for long-term monitoring operations. She'd been under surveillance in her own neighborhood. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. Dr. Washington, FBI, your cover is blown. Blackwater knows who you are. Get out now. The SUVs were closer now, and Amara could see more security personnel inside, but they weren't just security guards. The way they moved, the coordination, the equipment, these were operators. Military contractors. Margaret, Amara said slowly, who exactly hired Blackwater? Margaret's eyes glittered with malicious triumph. Someone who understands the importance of keeping certain kinds of people in their place. Rodriguez moved to grab Amara's arm, but she stepped back smoothly, her hand instinctively moving toward her concealed weapon. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Harrison warned. The lead SUV pulled up to the curb, and 4 more men emerged. These weren't wearing polo shirts. They wore tactical gear and moved with the precision of a military unit. Amara's mind raced through possibilities. She was outnumbered, potentially outgunned, and in the middle of what was clearly a planned operation. But she was also an FBI agent with 15 years of experience, and she'd walked into worse situations and come out alive. Her phone buzzed one more time. Another text from the unknown number. We're coming. Hold your position. Who's coming? She wondered, but then she heard the distant sound of helicopters approaching from the south. Margaret heard it too, and for the first time since the confrontation began, uncertainty flickered across her face. What's that? Margaret asked. Harrison pressed his earpiece, listening to something only he could hear. His face went pale. Ma'am, he said to Margaret, we need to abort this operation. Now? Abort. We're not aborting anything. This woman is federal agents, Rodriguez interrupted, pointing at the horizon where 3 black helicopters were. The sound of helicopter rotors created a deafening symphony as FBI tactical agents rappelled onto Willowbrook's pristine lawns, their boots crushing Margaret's beloved ornamental grass. In the distance, sirens wailed as what looked like half the Bureau's field office converged on the suburban development. Amara watched Margaret's world collapse in real time. The woman who had strutted across the lawn minutes earlier now stood paralyzed, her mouth working soundlessly as tactical agents surrounded the Blackwater operatives with military precision. Hands up, weapons on the ground. Now Harrison, the Leon operative, slowly raised his hands, his eyes never leaving Amara's face. But Rodriguez, the broader man with the scar, tensed like a coiled spring. Don't even think about it, Amara warned, recognizing the signs of someone about to make a very stupid decision. Rodriguez's hand darted toward his concealed weapon, but 3 red laser dots appeared on his chest before he could clear leather. He froze, breathing hard. Smart choice, said a familiar voice behind Amara. She turned to see Special Agent Jake Morrison, her boss and mentor, approaching with a tactical team flanking him. At 55, Morrison moved with the careful grace of someone who'd spent 30 years in the Bureau, and his gray eyes held the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. Jake? Amara said, relief flooding through her. How did you weave? Been monitoring Blackwater's communications for weeks, Morrison replied, never taking his eyes off the tactical situation unfolding around them. When they started chattering about a code yellow at your address, we mobilized everything. Margaret found her voice at last, though it came out as a strangled croak. This is private property. You can't just actually. We can. Morrison displayed his credentials with the casual authority of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Special Agent Morrison, FBI? Ma'am, you're going to want to remain silent until you speak with an attorney? I don't need an attorney. Margaret's voice rose to a shriek. I'm the victim here. This woman, she jabbed a finger at Amara, has been disrupting our community, and I have every right to what Morrison's voice cut through her tirade like a blade. To hire military contractors to surveil a federal agent, to attempt an illegal detention on American soil, to participate in what appears to be a domestic terrorism operation. The color drained from Margaret's face as the full scope of her situation hit her. Agent Washington, Morrison continued, would you mind explaining to Mrs. Kellerman exactly what she stepped in? Amara nodded, pulling out her phone and opening a file she'd been compiling for months. Margaret, meet Operation Night, a network of former military contractors who've been using private security companies to conduct surveillance and harassment operations against federal agents, civil rights leaders, and activists across the country. She showed Margaret the screen, which displayed a complex organizational chart with photographs and connection lines. Your friend Harrison there? Real name Marcus Hendricks, former Delta Force, cashiered out after 3 instances of excessive force in Iraq. Rodriguez is actually David Chen, former Navy SEAL, discharged for conduct unbecoming. Harrison Marcus glared at her but said nothing as FBI agents zip-tied his hands behind his back. The surveillance equipment in the house across the street has been recording everything in this neighborhood for 3 months. Amara continued. Every conversation, every visitor, every routine. They've been building profiles on residents, looking for leverage, for weaknesses they could exploit. Margaret's legs gave out, and she sat heavily on the curb, her designer handbag tumbling into the gutter. But here's the really interesting part. Margaret, Morrison said, crouching down. To her, eye level, Blackwater Private Security is a front company. It doesn't exist in any meaningful way. No real offices, no legitimate contracts, no actual security services. It's a shell company designed to launder money and provide cover for illegal operations. That's impossible, Margaret whispered. I signed contracts. I paid them. You signed fake contracts with a fake company, and your payments went into accounts controlled by a domestic terrorist cell. Amara finished. Congratulations, Margaret. You've been funding enemies of the state. The tactical agents were loading the captured operatives into armored vehicles when a new voice cut through the chaos. Excuse me? What's happening here? Amara turned to see Robert Hartley, the president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board, hurrying across the street. At 70, Robert was everything Margaret pretended to be actual old money. Quiet dignity, and the kind of understated authority that came from decades of real power. Robert, Margaret called out desperately, thank God you're here. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. But Robert's face was grim as he approached Morrison. Agent Morrison, I presume. We spoke on the phone last month. Mr. Hartley. Morrison shook his hand. Thank you for your cooperation in this matter. Margaret's eyes widened in horror. You knew, Robert, you knew about this? Robert looked down at her with something approaching pity. Margaret, when you brought your Blackwater proposal to the board 6 months ago, I immediately called the FBI. Real private security companies don't offer their services for free. Real security professionals don't operate out of mail drops and use burner phones. You set me up, Margaret breathed. You set yourself up, Robert replied. When Agent Washington moved in 3 months ago, she identified herself to me as a federal agent conducting an investigation. I've been cooperating with the Bureau ever since. Amara felt a grudging respect for the old man. Most people would have panicked at learning they had an undercover FBI agent in their neighborhood. Robert had kept his mouth shut and played his part perfectly. Mrs. Kellerman, Morrison said, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, stop. Margaret scrambled to her feet. I can give you information. I can tell you things about the operation. Morrison paused mid-Miranda. I'm listening. There are others, Margaret said desperately. Other neighborhoods? Other HOAs? They approached dozens of communities across the state. They said they were building a network, a way to keep track of undesirable elements moving into good neighborhoods. Amara exchanged a look with Morrison. This was bigger than they'd thought. How many other communities? Morrison asked. I don't know exactly, but they mentioned Phoenix, Denver, Seattle. They said they had operations in 12 states. Morrison keyed his radio. Command, this is Morrison. We need to expand the operation. Multi-state coordination, possible RICO implications. Copy that, came the reply. Denver field office is already reporting suspicious activity at 3 gated communities. Phoenix is investigating 2 more. Margaret was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was terrorists. They said they were protecting property values, keeping the community safe. From what? Amara asked. Though she already knew the answer. From ... double quotes. Margaret's voice broke. From people who didn't belong. From diversity quotas and integration. From the government forcing us to accept residents who would lower our standards. The naked racism in her words hung in the air like toxic gas. Even she seemed to realize how it sounded, because she immediately tried to backtrack. I mean, it wasn't about race. It was about maintaining community standards, property values. It was about keeping black people out of white neighborhoods, Amara said flatly. Let's call it what it is. Morrison's radio crackled again. Agent Morrison, we've got a problem. The surveillance house is wired to blow. Bomb squad is en route, but we need to evacuate the immediate area. The blood drained from Amara's face. She looked at her house, at the wildflower garden that had started this whole confrontation, at the life she'd tried to build in this quiet suburban street. How long do we have? Morrison asked. Unknown. The wiring is sophisticated. Probably on a timer or a remote detonation. Could be minutes, could be hours. Margaret let out a wail of despair. My house, my beautiful house. Your house is the least of your problems right now, Morrison told her grimly. As if summoned by his words, a new fleet of vehicles arrived at the community entrance. These weren't FBI sedans or tactical trucks. These were news vans, their satellite dishes extending like mechanical flowers reaching for the sun. How did they find out so fast? Amara wondered aloud. Morrison grimaced. 20 agents rappelling from helicopters into a gated community tends to attract attention. We've got maybe 10 minutes before this place is crawling with reporters. As he spoke, Amara's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about it made her blood run cold. Answer it, Morrison said, reading her expression. Put it on speaker. Amara accepted the call and switched to speaker mode. Hello, Dr. Washington. The voice was electronically distorted, processed through a voice changer. Congratulations on your little victory today. Who is this? Someone who's been watching your career with great interest. Did you really think shutting down one cell would stop the larger operation? Morrison gestured frantically to the tactical team's communication specialist, who immediately began working to trace the call. What larger operation? Amara asked. Oh, doctor, you're so focused on the trees that you can't see the forest. Night watch. The FBI command center had been hastily erected in Willowbrook's community clubhouse, transforming the elegant space where Margaret once held her 1-inches HOA meetings into a high-tech war room. Banks of monitors displayed tactical feeds, communication intercepts, and surveillance footage from a dozen cities across the country. Amara sat at a conference table across from Margaret Kellerman, who looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past 6 hours. The woman's perfectly coiffed hair hung in limp strands, her designer makeup smeared with tears and debris from the explosion that had destroyed the surveillance house. Tell me about the first contact, Amara said, her voice professionally calm. Despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system, Margaret's hands shook as she reached for the cup of coffee an agent had brought her. It was 8 months ago. A man named Davidson called me, said he represented a consulting firm that specialized in community security assessments. Morrison leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying Margaret with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Physical description: tall, maybe 6'2", silver hair, expensive suit. He had this voice, ... double quotes. Margaret shuddered. Cultured, confident. The kind of voice that made you want to trust him. What did he offer? Amara asked. A comprehensive security evaluation. He said they'd identified Willowbrook as a community at risk for what he called demographic infiltration. He showed me statistics, charts, graphs showing how property values declined when certain elements moved into exclusive neighborhoods. The racist undertones weren't lost on anyone in the room. Agent Sarah Chen, the Bureau's cybercrime specialist, looked up from her laptop with barely concealed disgust. Did he mention specific targets? Morrison asked. Margaret nodded miserably. He had a list. Federal employees, civil rights lawyers, activists, journalists. He said these were people who would use their positions to force integration, to lower community standards. And you believed him, Amara said flatly. He had documentation. Margaret's voice rose defensively. Court cases, news articles, property, records. He showed me what happened to Brookhaven Estates in Colorado after they were forced to accept Section 8 housing. Property values dropped 40% in 2 years. Amara recognized the manipulation immediately. Take legitimate concerns about property values and twist them into racial fear. It was Propaganda 101, and Margaret had swallowed it whole. When did Blackwater enter the picture? Morrison asked. 3 months later, Davidson said they needed local security assets to monitor potential threats. He said Blackwater was a subsidiary of his consulting firm, specialized in discrete surveillance and threat assessment. Agent Chen looked up from her computer. I've got something. The phone number Margaret called for Blackwater traces back to a VIP service registered in the Cayman Islands. The payments she made went through 3 shell companies before disappearing into cryptocurrency, professional-grade money laundering, Morrison observed. This isn't some amateur hate group. This is sophisticated. Amara's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She glanced at it and felt ice water in her veins. Enjoying your little investigation, Dr. Washington? You should check the news. Morrison, she said urgently, showing him the phone. He immediately signaled to Agent Chen, turn on the news, all channels. The wall-mounted television flickered to life, showing a breaking news report. The anchor's face was grave as she spoke. This is a developing story out of Phoenix, Arizona, where FBI agents have arrested 17 individuals in what sources describe as a domestic terrorism investigation similar to today's raids in multiple cities. The screen cut to aerial footage of FBI agents surrounding a gated community that looked eerily similar to Willowbrook. Then the scene switched to Denver, then Seattle, then Atlanta. In each location, the same pattern: upscale neighborhoods, tactical teams, arrested residents, and security personnel. Jesus, Morrison breathed. How many operations were running simultaneously? Agent Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard. I'm seeing reports from Phoenix, Denver, Seattle, Atlanta, Dallas, Jacksonville, Portland, Sacramento, Virginia Beach, Nashville, Austin, and Charlotte. That's 12 cities, boss. Exactly what the voice on the phone said. Amara realized. 12 states. The news anchor continued. Sources close to the investigation tell us that these raids are connected to what the FBI is calling Operation Mirror Image, a coordinated effort to dismantle a domestic terrorism network that has been conducting illegal surveillance on federal agents, civil rights leaders, and minority families in affluent communities across the country. Margaret stared at the screen in horror. Operation Mirror Image. They never mentioned that name to me. Because you were a pawn, Amara said harshly, a useful idiot who gave them cover and legitimacy. The news report continued with file footage of similar communities, all upscale, all predominantly white, all with recent controversies about community standards and new residents who didn't fit the traditional demographic. The pattern is becoming clear, Morrison said grimly. They weren't just running surveillance. They were conducting a sociological experiment. Agent Chen pulled up a map on her laptop, marking each of the raided locations. Look at this. Every single community shares specific characteristics. Median income over $150,000. Less than 5% minority population, active HOAs with strict architectural guidelines, and recent conflicts over new residents who didn't match the traditional demographics. They were studying us, Amara said, the pieces falling into place, testing how we respond to different scenarios, mapping our behavioral patterns, our communication protocols, our response times. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the same number. Very good, Doctor. You're beginning to understand, but you're still thinking too small. This time, Morrison was ready. He signaled to the technical team, who immediately began tracing the message. Keep him talking, Morrison whispered. Amara typed back, what am I missing? The response came immediately. You think this is about racism? About surveillance? About domestic terrorism? But those are just the tools. The real question is, what were we building toward? Tell me. Look at the map, Dr. Washington. Look at the locations. What do they have in common besides demographics? Agent Chen pulled up a more detailed map, overlaying various data points. After a moment, her face went pale. Boss, she said quietly, every single one of these communities is within 50 miles of a major federal facility, FBI field offices, federal courthouses, military installations, government research facilities. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just studying minority residents, Morrison said slowly. They were mapping federal response capabilities, learning how quickly we could mobilize, how we coordinate between agencies, how we communicate during crisis situations. Amara's phone buzzed again. Now you're getting warmer, but you're still missing the forest for the trees. Tell me, Doctor, what's the one thing all 12 operations had in common? She thought for a moment, then typed. They all had federal agents living in the communities. Excellent. And what kind of federal agents? Amara felt her blood run cold as she realized the answer. Behavioral analysts. Profilers, people trained to study human psychology and predict behavior. The 12 communities, Dr. Washington, weren't random targets. They were carefully selected because each one contained a federal agent with specific psychological expertise. We weren't just studying communities, we were studying the agents who study others. The phone went silent for a long moment. Then, one final message appeared. Congratulations, Doctor. You've just helped us complete the most comprehensive psychological profile of FBI behavioral analysis methods ever compiled. Your response patterns, communication protocols, and processes under stress have been invaluable to our research. Morrison grabbed the phone, but it was too late. The conversation was over. Agent Chen, he barked. Tell me you got a trace on those messages. Chen shook her head grimly. Bounced through 17 proxy servers across 6 countries. Whoever this is, they know what they're doing. Margaret had been following the conversation with growing horror. You mean, they used me. All of this was just to study you people. That's exactly what it means. Amara said, your racism, your fear, your desperate need to feel superior to others, they weaponized all of it to get close to us. The news report on the television had moved on to analysis, with former FBI officials discussing the implications of such a coordinated domestic surveillance operation. But Amara wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about the voice on the phone, about the sophisticated planning, about the resources required to coordinate operations in 12 cities simultaneously. Morrison, she said quietly, this isn't just domestic terrorism. This is something bigger, something with serious funding and institutional support. Before Morrison could respond, Agent Chen's computer chimed with an urgent alert. Boss, she said, her voice tight with concern. I just got a hit on facial recognition. The man Margaret described as Davidson. We've got him on security cameras. At 3 other targeted communities over the past 8 months, she pulled up a series of surveillance photos showing a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and expensive suits meeting with At 3:47 a.m., Amara's secure phone exploded with alerts that would change everything she thought she knew about the investigation. She'd been dozing fitfully in the FBI command center, her head resting on a stack of case files, when the cacophony of incoming messages jolted her awake. Morrison, she called out, scanning the flood of notifications. We've got a problem. Morrison emerged from the communications room, his tie loosened and his usually immaculate appearance showing the strain of 18 hours without sleep. What now? Look at this. Amara held up her phone, showing a cascade of news alerts. Simultaneous attacks on federal facilities in 8 cities, FBI field offices in Phoenix and Denver, federal courthouses in Seattle and Atlanta, a military research facility in Virginia Beach. Agent Chen looked up from her workstation, her face pale in the blue glow of multiple monitors. Boss, I'm seeing massive cyber attacks too. Someone just tried to breach the Bureau's central database, the Pentagon's personnel records, and the NSA's communication networks. Morrison's jaw tightened. Phase 2. The main screen flickered to life, showing CNN's breaking news coverage. The anchor's voice was tense as she reported. This is a coordinated attack on federal infrastructure, unlike anything we've seen since 9/11. At least 12 people are confirmed dead, with dozens more injured in what appears to be a synchronized assault on American law enforcement and military installations. Amara felt sick as the implications hit her. They used our responses to plan the attacks. Every raid we conducted today, every tactical decision we made, every communication protocol we followed, they were studying it all to find our weaknesses. Margaret Kellerman, who had been sleeping in a chair nearby under FBI protection, stirred at the sound of voices. When she saw the news coverage, her face crumpled. Oh God, she whispered. This is my fault. I helped them do this. No, Amara said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. You were manipulated by professionals. The fault lies with whoever orchestrated this operation. Morrison's secure phone rang, and he answered immediately. Morrison here. Yes, sir. I understand. We'll be ready. He hung up and turned to the room. That was the director. We've been ordered to escort Mrs. Kellerman to a secure facility. Apparently, she's not the only HOA president who's been targeted for elimination. Elimination? Margaret's voice rose in panic. Agent Chen pulled up a new screen showing police reports from across the country. 3 HOA presidents from the targeted communities have been found dead in the past 2 hours. All staged to look like suicides, but the forensics don't match. Amara studied the data, her profiler instincts kicking in. They're cleaning house, eliminating the witnesses who could identify Davidson or provide details about the operation. But I already told you everything I know, Margaret protested. That's not the point, Morrison explained grimly. You're a liability now. You can identify their methods, their approach, their psychological manipulation techniques. Dead witnesses can't testify in court. As if summoned by his words, the lights in the command center suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Agent Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard. Someone just cut the power grid to this entire sector, and they're jamming our communications. I'm not getting signals from the perimeter teams. Morrison drew his weapon, his training taking over. Defensive positions, Washington, get Kellerman. To the safe room, Chen. How long until backup arrives? I can't reach backup, Chen replied tersely. All communications are down. Through the clubhouse windows, Amara could see vehicles moving in the darkness outside, black SUVs with their headlights off, approaching with tactical precision. They found us, she realized. Somehow, they tracked us here. Margaret was hyperventilating now, her breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. I don't want to die. Please, I know I did terrible things, but I don't want to die. Amara grabbed Margaret by the shoulders, forcing eye contact. You're not going to die, but I need you to focus. Is there anything else you remember about Davidson? Anything that might help us identify who's really behind this? I don't know. He mentioned something once, about a client who was interested in American social dynamics, someone who wanted to understand how communities could be turned against each other. What kind of client? He said it was academic research. But double quotes. Margaret's eyes widened as a memory surfaced. He had an accent, very slight, but I noticed it when he said certain words. European, maybe? and he wore a watch expensive, with Cyrillic letters on the face. Morrison and Amara exchanged a look. Russian intelligence, that would explain the resources, Morrison said quietly. The coordination, the sophistication, the long-term planning. This isn't domestic terrorism, it's a foreign intelligence operation designed to study and destabilize American communities. Agent Chen looked up from her computer with urgent news. Boss, I just cracked part of their communication system. They're not just here to eliminate witnesses. They're planning to stage something that will look like a terrorist attack by domestic extremists. What do you mean? According to these intercepts, they're going to make it look like Margaret and the other HOA presidents were part of a larger white supremacist network that decided to attack federal facilities when their surveillance operation was exposed. The pieces clicked into place in Amara's mind with horrifying clarity. They're going to kill us all and frame us for the attacks. A racist HOA president? An FBI profiler? Federal agent Saul, supposedly part of a domestic terrorist cell that turned violent when exposed. Outside, she could hear the sound of boots on pavement, moving with military precision toward the clubhouse. Morrison keyed his radio, hoping for a miracle. This is Special Agent Morrison, FBI. We are under attack at the Willowbrook Estates Command Center. Request immediate backup. Static was the only response. How many agents do we have here? Amara asked. 8, including us, against what looks like at least 20 hostiles with superior equipment and positioning. Margaret suddenly grabbed Amara's arm. There's another way out. The service tunnel that connects the clubhouse to the maintenance building. It was part of the original construction, but most people don't know about it. Morrison looked skeptical. How do you know about it? I'm on the architectural review committee. I've seen all the building plans. The sound of boots was getting closer, and Amara could see tactical lights beginning to sweep the windows. Where's the entrance? Morrison asked. Margaret led them to a storage closet at the back of the building. Behind stacks of pool maintenance supplies, she revealed a narrow metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. It runs underground for about 200 yards, comes up in the maintenance shed by the community garden. Morrison made a quick decision. Chen, grab the critical files and the communication equipment. Washington, you're with Kellerman. I'll coordinate the retreat with the other agents. As they prepared to enter the tunnel, Amara's phone buzzed one final time. The message was from the same unknown number that had been taunting them. Goodbye, Dr. Washington. Your psychological profile has been most illuminating. When the investigation into the Willowbrook terrorist cell concludes, your reputation and the Bureau's credibility will be permanently damaged. Thank you for your unwitting cooperation. Bastards, Amara muttered, then turned to Margaret. I need you to listen carefully. When we get out of here, you're going to be the key witness in the biggest counterintelligence case in decades. Are you ready for that? Margaret's face had changed. The entitled, racist HOA president was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood the full scope of what had been done to her and her community. They used my hatred, she said quietly. They took the worst parts of who I am and turned them into weapons against my own country. Yes, they did. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Margaret straightened her shoulders, and, for the first time since the confrontation began, Amara saw real strength in the woman's eyes. I'm going to help you stop them. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the clubhouse as the assault team breached the main entrance. Morrison signaled for silence as they slipped into the narrow tunnel, pulling the metal door closed behind them. In the darkness of the underground passage, crawling through decades of dust and spiderwebs, Amara realized that everything had changed. What started as a simple confrontation over landscaping had evolved into something that could reshape how America understood the threats it faced. Foreign intelligence services weren't just stealing secrets anymore. They were conducting psychological warfare, using America's own social divisions as weapons, turning communities against themselves from the inside. And Margaret Kellerman, racist HOA president and unwitting traitor, might be the only witness who could prove it. Behind them, the sound of explosions rocked the clubhouse as the assault team discovered the empty command center. They had minutes, maybe less, before the attackers figured out the escape route. Keep moving, Morrison whispered as they crawled through the narrow tunnel. Everything depends on getting you two out alive. But Amara knew that survival was only the first step. The real challenge would be convincing the world that the Willowbrook